Welcome to my horror games workshop. I am, of course, Mustang Dev. It is pronounced Dev, as in game dev, not to be confused by Dev, which is also a common Hindi name, which has been an assumption in a few chats. Completely fair. So, who am I? You would be wondering. Let me. Okay, there should be a way for me to fully erase a lot faster. But for now, I'll be scuffed. Okay. Okay. Who am I? I am an indie game dev who has made 2 horror games. Was worked on 2 horror games. One of them is called Kamla. These are both horror games that are made on PC, which is available on Steam. Kamla is a first person horror game set in an Indian folklore setting where you play as a tantric exorcist who has to rid this possessed newlywed bride called Kamla from evil. The most similar game you could say to it is Granny, where you have puzzles to solve, items to collect, a lady to run around from, and as she's running around, you go and hide under beds and all of that stuff. And so that is what Kamla is. And then the other game that I have worked on, this is my solo game, and that is Blinding Oversight. Blinding Oversight is also a first person horror game, but this one's an atmospheric horror game where you play in the shoes of a girl called Emma, and you wake up in an abandoned old wooden house, and you have to figure out how you ended up there. You have a little bit of amnesia, and then you have to investigate the surroundings and find out the mystery of the house and try to recollect your memories as you go through it. Both the games are short, they're like probably like you can finish both the games in under 2 hours. And Kamla was released in 2024 if I'm correct, and this one came out last year. Both the games are available on Steam, and oh, I forgot a V. Okay, my camera is covering the text. Oh shit, you're right. What do I do about that? Should I move my face down? Should I move it here? Actually no, I'll just keep in mind not to write it there. There you go. The 2 games I worked on, Kamla and Blinding Oversight. Now let's talk about horror games. One of the questions you would have maybe is, why horror games? You know, there's horror movies, there's books that are in horror, but what makes a horror game more interesting? And for that, I have a few good points. One is interaction. I believe that interaction and interactivity in games is what makes video games one of the best forms of media. And when you watch a movie, when you read a book, I mean, with the book you need a lot of imagination, so that can be powerful. When you watch a movie, there are certain cliches you can follow, which of course cliches exist in games as well, but there is this level of immersion, which is another point I should add. there is a level of immersion in horror games where you get put into the shoes of the person in the horror situation, which makes them a lot more scarier in my opinion. And sometimes why I also like to watch instead of play, because it's like one layer separated. And with movies it just doesn't necessarily do that. Like, I think the best part in horror in movies is when there's like something off the frame. Every scare has to be a lot more manufactured. You know, it's written into the script when that happens. But in a horror game, of course, there are scripted jump scares, but sometimes in a lot of games, you don't know when the chase is going to begin. You don't know when you're going to walk into a room. I've had a friend who played Outlast, and for 30 minutes he was stuck. He was afraid to like really proceed further in the asylum. You know who you are, and experiences like that makes talking about horror games so interesting too, because everyone has sort of a different feeling they come out of when they play it. um, there's one scare that could be a lot more scarier for one person than the other person. And in games like in games where chase sequences happen, there is so much unpredictability. That's a huge word. Can I shorter, can I make that word shorter? Unpredictability. Yeah, that's another one I would say. um the variety of horror games, I think, far surpass the amount of horror movies out there. There are indie horror movies, but there is only a certain way. Like, the story for a horror movie has to do a lot of the heavy lifting, but in a horror game, the story doesn't have to be crazy. An example for that is the Mortuary Assistant. Absolutely amazing horror game. It doesn't have a very surreal, mind blowing story, but it has elements that make you feel uneasy. And if those elements were to be a movie, it wouldn't necessarily do much than just be like, you could walk out of there and be like, okay, I was unsettled, but like, I didn't feel like I went through an entire amusement park. The actually, okay, here's how I think horror movies and horror games are different. To me, horror movies is like a roller coaster ride. So you sit down, it takes you through the entire roller coaster, and if there's not a lot of ups and downs, you'll be a little disappointed. But horror games to me is like those what's the thing called? Those mazes, the scare houses where you walk around the house, you take your time, and the guys are in their costumes waiting for you to walk across, and then they scare you. So it's a lot more like hands on, and it's a lot more direct, because you may not be as scared, your friend might be with you, next to you, they may react differently. That's the experience of a multiplayer horror game. Actually, multiplayer is another good one. Multiplayer horror experience is something that you can only experience in the media of video games, to be able to be in that space together or separately. Like, I know I criticize Phasmophobia, but I've had a lot of fun playing Phasmophobia. Yeah, that's a good one. You can't hello cow, by the way. You can't cover your eyes or fast forward. You have to be paying attention. Yeah, and the game waits for you. It's like you have to take the leap of faith. You can't just be like, okay, pause. I mean, you could pause the movie, I suppose, but then when you pause the movie, you are taken out of it. The immersion and everything is paused. And in this example, you could pause a game too, but you can be in the atmosphere of the game, but you get to decide the pacing. So I think agency would be another one. You have an agency on what you're doing and what the consequences is of you going and activating the thing. So That is why I recommend horror games. If you are a fan of horror in any form, especially horror movies, then horror games is something you absolutely have to try. Why make horror games? You know, that's the bigger $1 million question. If you are to be a game developer, what are the enticing reasons and what are the popular reasons that horror games are so vast? uh, if you look through Steam, if you look through itch.io, so many horror games. Queso and like other streamers, they get to pick a new horror game every day. There's like 3 or 4 indie games coming out every day. Well, I would say this is hard to put down in a point, but one big reason that makes horror game good is that it's reactionary. You are making a game where you can put a PNG with a very loud noise and it will make the streamer playing jump. And the streamer is happy because he got content. The viewers are happy because they saw the streamer get scared. And you, the developer, are happy because now 1 million people probably saw uh, your game. So reactionary would be the best thing about a horror game because you can just there's just so many horror YouTubers and you don't have to um, like this is something that when we worked on Kamla, it was important for us. Like if we discussed that, okay, we want to have a game, we want to make a game that is, flashy, that sort of like makes the person playing jump and scream. And that happened, a lot of people jumped and screamed, very big Indian YouTubers played it. And it's like, it's safe to say that it created a cultural phenomenon because there is so much brain rot content on Kamla right now on YouTube. You guys should like try it sometime. Go to YouTube, type Kamla game, and just look at the kind of reels that come out and videos. And like they have like GTA characters dancing around with Kamla, and like they make up their own stories. It's insane. It's very insane. And a lot of those videos have like thousands or millions of views. And it all trickled down, or like it all started because we made a character that is loud and scary, right? So having chase sequences fairly easier to do. You have a thing that you design, a pro thing that has its own detection radius. It detects you, it runs to you, catches you, you die. I would say simplicity is another big reason. So when you are making your first few games, a common funny joke they talk about in the game subreddit, game design subreddit, is a person wanting to make an RPG for the first time. That is very, very ambitious. But no one is going to tell you it's ambitious to make a horror game as your first game, because it's you can make a full-fledged horror game from start to end, and the bar is not super high. If it scares you, that's good enough. So there's that, there's simplicity. There's also, in my opinion, I would say there's a good amount of assets, like assets for what's the word, assets, plugins, all of that stuff. There's like a very famous atmospheric house uh, asset in the Unity asset store, and it has an entire house with two versions of textures. There is a normal house version and there is weathered down furniture and stuff. That pack is so famous, and I've used it in my game as well. It's so famous that when you know the assets that are in that pack, you will see it in every other indie horror game out there. It is extremely popular. This is like those specific boxes that you may see. Okay, like these boxes. Wait, I'm gonna try to do some drawing. You'll see these kind of boxes, like files and boxes, in those horror games. Or you may see this specific plate with like a stain and some stuff, this very specific beer bottle. from a very specific brand. All those books in the bookshelves, which I had a bunch in my in blinding oversight, and they had um, like two of my friends would read every single book and notice how many duplicates there are, and all of this is part of like one of the one famous asset, and it's used in so many games. um, so it helps having like assets for that. You don't necessarily, that's the other point I would get to, because of these assets. No, you don't necessarily need an artist, so no need for artist. So you can make a game, you can make a horror game without having to touch any sort of 3D modeling artist or any sort of just even if it's a 2D game, even then you won't necessarily need an artist. um, I mean, I'm not even going to touch about AI and AI art and stuff, but this looks like mead. I meant to say need. You don't, yeah, you don't need an artist to make a horror game. You can use all the 3D assets, the 3D models in Sketchfab, everything that's available. You can put money into it. You can get free ones. There is like a bunch of horror 3D models. You can get animations on Mixamo, popular website for animations, and essentially, yeah, you need a very low budget. That's the other thing I would say. Low budget and fast pipeline. So you can start from beginning to end very quickly. Now we can go a little bit more deep about what kind of horror games you can jump into. So let's talk about genres. Horror genres. Now this is a segment I really enjoy. Just talking about genres in any big genre. Like horror is a genre, sure, but like it has a lot of subgenres, and we can discuss a few of them. Now obviously these aren't like officially written down anywhere. People make their own little labels and definitions of horror games. So I'll be mentioning the popular ones. There are obviously niche ones. I'll try to cover a few niche ones, and then I'll try to give examples of some of them. uh, but actually for examples I have a PPT in the end, so I'll probably save the examples for then. Sorry. Okay. Horror genres. So one of the most famous genres of horror games is survival. And when you think survival, let me write it on all caps. You may assume that it's like hunger and thirst. That's not necessarily. Survival horror games focus on a few factors: life and death, obviously, right? You can die, something happens, you die. Then there is resource management in them. So if you think of games like um, Resident Evil, then you would have resource management, most likely. Forest is a very popular survival game that I really had fun playing. You have enemies. It's not usually one entity chasing you. You can do stuff. There's combat. There is what else would there be in a popular survival horror game? Um, there would be, I mean, of course there would be a direction. I mean, I guess every game would have direction. I think it's safe to say that survival would mostly have these factors around it. So you have that. Then you have what's the word, psychological horror, another banger category. Psychological. Is there a lot of noise coming from my background? Because my mom is moving around in the kitchen. Okay, I'm fine. All right. So you have psychological horror. These are the ones that play with your mind. You go in the game and you may expect like things to not be that crazy, and then the story picks up and it goes insane. I would also put existential stuff in psychological. So if they are a little existential, then I would put it in that category. Mess with your mind, classic Doki Doki and all of that. Very heavy topics. Heavy topics is a pretty classic that go with psychological. You need to be able to, you know, a lot of like trauma related concepts would be in the game. Everything of all the worst traumas, they'd probably all be mentioned in a psychological horror game, like in some psychological horror game. They maybe focus on depression, they may focus on like abuse of some kind, uh, and they have their own following as well, because sometimes people kind of find comfort in these kind of psychological horror games because they may represent what trauma feels like in the form of a game. And I think I find that sweet in a way, that sometimes a lot of these horror categories and like genres can have a very wholesome community and like people connecting with each other, saying how these games kind of represented what they felt like through trauma and all that stuff. We have not talked about creepypasta, but that is also something I would put in psychological. Like creepypasta is a good one. I was also going to say eldritch horror would come under psychological as well, because eldritch horror is in a way it deals with like otherworldly beings and stuff, and cosmic horror, basically eldritch, cosmic. To me, all of that come under this, because they are horrifying to you when you think about it. It's like the psychological horror games are those that like once it's done, you sit and think about it, you're like, damn. So we have survival, we have psychological. I hope you're taking down notes, guys. And I'm sure you probably know a lot of them too. I know I have a big amount of gamers in my audience, but this can reach an audience that aren't gamers either. So we have that. The next one, which I like to talk about, is atmospheric horror. And I'm obviously not biased at all with this, because I literally made a game on it. But atmospheric horror to me is my favorite part of horror, and obviously every game has an atmosphere, right? So it's not like if it's not in the atmospheric category, it's not horror. But these games excel in the atmosphere itself. Like when you think about these games, you think about the atmosphere. Classic is Silent Hill. Silent Hill, you think of the fog, and it's like, okay, the fog is literally the atmosphere of the game. So horror games that are immersive would come under this. They're immersive. I think what makes a atmospheric horror game really good is the quiet segments. I forgot how to spell quiet. Is this how you spell quiet? Quiet slash stillness. That is not how you spell stillness though. Okay. I think atmospheric horror games really play with the quiet and stillness more, and they have good pacing where it's not like if you're playing an atmospheric horror game, you can't expect a thing like chasing and running around you the entire time. There may not be a lot of combat, there may not be a lot of health management and game over scenes, and it could have that, but that's not what makes atmospheric horror game that interesting. It's the environment is what uh, plays into an atmospheric horror game. It's the thing that carries the game essentially, and they're very art driven. I think art heavy would be another thing that really makes an atmospheric horror really good. So I think that's enough about atmospheric horror. What else? Now there's another one which unfortunate. I mean, it's not unfortunate, but um, it really rose to scene since a game called Five Nights at Freddy's, and that is mascot horror. Mascot horror is too popular to ignore, um, and it started with games like Five Nights at Freddy's. And initially, while doing research, I was seeing some people think that this word gets used for all kinds of horror games. Of any game that has a protagonist, like a character, then it's a mascot horror. Like, would Kamla be a mascot horror? But it's actually not true. Mascot horror specifically relies on uh, kid friendly kid friendly what's the word, characters, but dark setting. Yeah, like that's the key point of mascot horror. It's, yeah, Five Nights at Freddy's is like one of the most famous ones that started this genre, but this genre is so big now that there's multiple games. Like, it's a whole genre based on it. It's basically like a teddy bear that you would think is friendly, but it's fucked up. There is a toy, or like there is, I forgot the name of this one game, I'll try to find it, but it's basically like a twist on Dora the Explorer, but like a, you play through a VHS tape, and it's like a more messed up version of Dora, and in the background you click on things that are messy, and then Dora kind of goes like black eyes, and Amanda the Adventurer, there you go, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's insane. And I would put that under mascot horror too, because you play as a character who, it it feeds on nostalgia. I think that's one point that you would put it on. Thank you, Tato. You have to be patient when I don't reach out, because I'm locked in. um, we have nostalgia, which I think plays a key factor on this. So if you grew up watching like these fun cartoons, it would kind of appeal to you more in that sense. um, I personally don't think too deeply about mascot horror, because I don't know. I think the gameplay, if the gameplay is interesting, then sure. But there are some Five Nights at Freddy's games that I really like, but I don't think it's because it's a mascot horror. Like, I don't think it's the mascot part that's scary to me. I think I like the gameplay of the old Five Nights at Freddy's games where you click around and it's interactive. So I would say that these would be the most popular genres. Uh, there are more which don't necessarily, like, which can kind of come into like one another. There's also like co-op horror, right? So when you think of games like I mean, we can talk about it, I guess. Like co-op horror, you have games like Phasmo, you have Lethal Company. I'm exactly like, I'm not writing the what makes co-op horror good, because it's sort of like, it's not, its selling point is that it's co-op, you know. Yeah, SCP Containment Breach, you have Content Warning, you have of course Repo, and these all have like atmosphere, they have the chase sequences, they have some psychological gameplay, in a way. Like, I think Phasmo can come under psychological somewhat, because it gaslights you sometimes. um, but it's like the co-op aspect is what it's for. It's not like it's a different genre of gameplay necessarily. I'm not going to call them slop. I just did, but I'm not going to call them slop. So I think that's enough to talk about genres, because I feel like we're teasing the subject, but we're not getting into the gritty of it. Okay. Now, I want to explain that if we were to make a horror game, what are some questions, key points to making a good horror game? These are things I learned through failing, through seeing a bunch of cool games that were made, through seeing what was popular in the games that I made, um, and what scared the most to me as well. So I think a good horror game, of course, needs to be memorable, right? So a plot or a story that's like, now if you think of a game like I'm on observation duty, it's kind of like, think Paranormal Activity, but it's a game where you click around and look at things, and it's, as a concept, so fascinating that it's the selling point already. um, you wake up in a thing and something chases you is ironically not the strongest selling point, but it's the easiest starting point to making a horror game. So the uniqueness of the plot can be pretty good. In my opinion, another thing that makes a horror game really good is subtlety. So things don't have to jump onto your face for it to be scary. They can just be around you. This kind of feeds into atmosphere, which is another key point. Um, you're in a post-apocalyptic world. If you made a horror game in a post-apocalyptic world, there are so many things you can do in the environment to sell that idea. Like there's wooden infrastructures that are like creaking. There is a very eerie lack of birds, maybe in a forest. You don't hear the sounds of birds, but you hear the sound of winds and then like fallen leaves. Uh, if you walk through a city, then again hollowness. The sound of wind can give that vibe, that it's a that's post-apocalyptic. Or if you have zombies, then the sound of zombies in the distance. The forest, the game Forest, it did such a good job with atmosphere, where there were some, the first few nights of the game, you don't necessarily see the cannibals. You hear them from far away and they're like screaming out in the distance, and it echoes through, and it's so good. That kind of shit. Sound design, I think, is very important. Good sounds. So here is a funny thing. This is something a lot of people may not agree with, but I have realized that puzzles are somewhat necessary. Puzzles equals pacing is what I'll say. It's not, and the reason for this is because when you have a moment to solve a puzzle, and it shouldn't be a very complicated puzzle. I think making puzzles by itself is a whole different game design discussion, of like what's a good puzzle and how long it should take and how much can it pull away from the atmosphere. So I actually think the game Teku Island or Teku Island, it has infuriating puzzles, but puzzles do add to gameplay, and because if you're just walking around, then there may not be much to do, and I've realized that too in the game I made. So a good way to break scary segments in a game is by doing puzzles. If you think of games like Soma, if you think of games like Me-Side, they all have like segments of puzzles in between for you to do something else, and it kind of like lets you rest. Our brain can have this repetition fatigue, where if something's chasing you for too long and it's the same thing happening again and again, you don't get scared anymore. Even with Kamla, for most players, after the first 3 or 4 chase sequences, it's not as scary. Kamla becomes more of a nuisance, and then you're like, okay, I just want to find the thing and finish the game. And The way a lot of AAA games break that, or even if you look at Outlast, they sprinkle in chase sequences, but then they put in like story beats or like, navigation and exploration. That is another good one. Good point. Exploration is another one you want to have. So have your character go from one point to another, because that is like the palette for you to like put in all the scares and sprinkle things around. And um, I think these would be the biggest points to making a good horror game. um, I forgot a key one, and that is testing. This kind of is slept on, but testing is incredibly important. You as a developer may have a very biased, um, what's the word, a very biased view of what the scary part is. When you don't test with others, you kind of might think that, oh, my game's not scary, let me up the ante, let me make it louder, let me make it jarring. Please, I personally, this is my personal mode, don't deafen the player. Don't give them actual hearing loss, because tinnitus is no joke. So please, indie devs, please don't deafen them. I know it can make you shit your pants when it's very loud, but don't harm your players. Like, you can harm them mentally, of course, you can traumatize them, but don't ruin their hearing loss. It is very selfish to claim their hearing by the thing you made, and then probably permanently affecting their experience on enjoying other games. So don't deafen the player, please. Don't be incredibly loud. Control your volumes. It can be loud and jarring, but not ear shattering, because I have seen games do that, and that's just if I hear a game does something that loud, I would absolutely not play it. Okay. So when you guys walk somewhere and a jump scare happens, that is called a trigger. And the way a trigger works is simple. If you are in a first person game, or even a third person game, you can imagine your character being a capsule. Okay, this is where your character is, and this is essentially the collider. This is what walks around the space, and it hits objects, and if there is a box here, the box will have its own collider. So when it hits that, it will not go through it. Then you have something called a trigger, which is basically like, you can imagine, sometimes it's a cube, sometimes it's a sphere. Is that a good cube? No, it's not. Right, let me make it bigger. Classic. Okay, now this cube, you can call it the trigger zone. Okay, essentially when your character walks into here, you just put a code that when that trigger is detected, a sound plays, or a jump scare happens. This is the most classic way a jump scare happens. The problem with this kind of very simple system is you can walk backwards and it will still trigger. And there are actually a bunch of horror games where you can try this, that if you're going to a scary segment, you can walk backwards, and the jump scare might still play in many games, in many indie games, sometimes even in AAA games, because this system only detects one object inside another object. So what a lot of games then have is something called a raycast. This is a very common game design, game mechanic, which essentially means if you are the camera, right? Oh, this is behind my head. Okay, if you are the camera, Think of this as the camera of the player. The character shoots a ray. It's simple as that. It's one ray that goes forward. You can decide what the ray, how long the ray is, if the ray can go through walls, or if it bounces back, what object it's looking at. So in a way, instead of walking into the object, you can look at the object. So sometimes there are triggers that happen when you look at an object. And for you to have, if you want to have a scare where you have to look and walk to a certain thing, because there are games in which jump scares don't activate until you're looking at it, what they do is they combine both of these. They combine the trigger, this thing, and then they combine the raycast. So you look at where you're going, and then you step into it, and boom, scary thing happens. That way, it's kind of more focused on where you're looking. So a little bit of sneak peek of what it looks like from that perspective. So that is one trick, that is the classic trick for jump scares. Then this is one thing I really learned recently and I kind of really enjoy, and I've implemented this in my own game as well. It's something to do with sound. Have you ever thought that sometimes horror games have a lot of sounds, and how do they manage that? Well, I'll talk about two sounds specifically. One is footsteps, and the other is ambient sounds. And the way these sounds work in a lot of games is that footsteps is obviously a lot more direct. It checks where your character is walking. So the way it checks in many games is, again, it uses raycasts or it uses a collider. Sometimes it's very simple and it's a collider. So this is your capsule, again, your character, and this is the platform you're walking on. Sometimes it shoots a ray down so that you know when it's how far away it is or where it's touching something. Sometimes it just detects that these two platforms are touching. Now then you have wood, and maybe over here you have metal. Have you ever noticed that when your character steps in many games from wood to a metallic piece, how the sound changes? It's not necessarily as simple as you may think, where it's like each material has its own, each object has its own what's the word, sound trait to it. Usually what they have is, if you, again, the repetition fatigue can come back into footsteps. You kind of want to randomize the sound of footsteps. So if you just have like clip clop playing again and again, clip clop, it becomes too basic. If you think of very old games, footsteps are very basic, and it makes you realize that, and it takes you away from the immersion, because when you actually walk, you never really have the same sound effect happen again and again when you're walking like a marble tile. So what they actually do is, if you're on wood, they will have around 5 or maybe 10 different sound files in a loop. They'll have a library full of different sound files. It'll be sound 1, sound 2, sound 3, sound 4, and then it will randomly choose between these. So first will play, and then the third will play, or then the fourth will play, and then the first will play again, or the second will play, and that way it randomizes the sound so that you don't get fatigued by it. But not only that, they do this for every material. So the wood has some sounds, the metal has some sounds, ice or some shit can have some sounds, and in a lot of these cases you don't have different objects, it's one big terrain. And if you think about it, think of terrain as like a big piece of paper, and the different terrains like grass and wood can be different blotches of paint. So they are not even a different object, they're one object with different colors on them. And in that case, they have the sounds attached to the materials in the terrain. So each material will be the thing that identifies what the sound is, and then they will all have its own thing. So it doesn't just detect the object, it detects which texture it's sitting on. Because if you think about it, the ice, the snow, the grass, they're all just textures, right? They're all just different images in a way, and colors. So it has to be this, like, so much layering that goes in just for sound effects of your foot your feet on like grass or whatever. And once you realize this, you will be looking and playing a lot of horror games and noticing how the sound changes very specifically for all of them. I shouldn't have erased this, I should have kept it here. Oh well. And then you have ambient sounds, and with ambient sounds it's sort of the similar thing where you have a whole list. Let's say, okay, this is what the list will be like. We'll have crow cawing. That will be an mp3. Then there will be okay, wind would not exactly be there. There would be a tree branch sound somewhere, like a tree branch snapping. This is, let's say you're in the forest, so I'm thinking that way. There could be a hyena in the distance, hyena growl or something. What else could there be? Oh, like thunder rumbling, thunder rumble. And what they do is, in a simple game, you can all put this as one audio file and it will just loop right from starting to end. But that, you start to notice that as a player, you will notice if you stand there and it's just playing the same things from the start to end. So what they do is they make they put them all in a list and then they shuffle them up. But not only that, sometimes they shuffle the timer as well, the time between each of the clips. So they'll keep a minimum of maybe like 10 seconds, for example, and a maximum of 30 seconds. So one audio file plays, let's say the crow caw, whole thing shuffles, then it picks a random number from this, the code, let's say 12 seconds, and then after 12 seconds later the tree branch breaks and then it shuffles the whole thing. Sometimes it, after every sound plays, they shuffle the whole list. Sometimes they go through the list till it's exhausted and then it's shuffled. So the more AAA games you see, or like the more work is put into the ambient sounds, little details like this can make your world so much more immersive, and it's things that you probably never would have thought about until you had to come up with it. And yeah, I find the sound stuff very freaking cool. Okay, I mean, this is kind of back to the first point, but sometimes the way they do raycast, like the scare detection is like, imagine you have an FOV, right? This is top down view. And it is top down view, and imagine you have an FOV. This is the range that your character sees. Sometimes they activate triggers or they play triggers over here. They shoot an arrow on the side, and so you have to be looking away for the scary thing to happen. That is very subtle. Not a lot of games do that, but yeah, it can make for a pretty cool horror scene. Oh, okay. Let's talk about NPCs. Horror NPCs, the ones that chase you down. How do they work? So there's a thing called state machines. Okay, and these are basically different states that an entity can have in a horror game. So you have, when you think of a, oh, I have such a good image for this. Wait, let me see if I can find it. I made a whole image for my programmer to explain to him during Kamla how the idea should work for the different stages of Kamla. I'm trying to find if I have it. It'll be very sad if I can't find it. I did find another cool little gimmick though, so let me show that. There you go. This here, does this show up on stream? Okay. Draw, yeah. I was trying to find if I had the file saved. This here is a little sketch I had made of how Kamla's dialogue system would work. So when in Kamla, when you walk around, there's different voice lines that play, and the way the mechanic, the logic works is that the chatter is dynamic. So essentially, the audio, the lines that Kamla says, it only really plays when she's close to the player, because there's no other reason to really play the audio if the character is not close to it. So the first condition is it's close to the player. The second condition is that little timer I said. So after every few seconds, it shuffles through a list, and then from that list, it will pick a voice line. So with that, we had also added how the different dialogues change. We had 2 sets of dialogues for the amount of items that the player had placed. So in the first 2 items, Kamla's ghost is a little more cocky, right? She's like, oh, मैं कोई बुड्ढे से नहीं डरती, you know, like, yeah, show yourself, where are you hiding, that kind of stuff. And then maybe a few more items get put in, and Kamla's ghost is like more desperate and angry, and there's a voice of like the real Kamla who's crying, and she's like, please let me out. So that's why I have the less than 2 items, more than 2, and less than 4, and more than 4 items. And based on that, she says different lines. And she says a line, and then the timer resets. And after the timer resets, she will say another line again. Obviously, with this, what it means is if you're hiding and sitting there with 2 items, Kamala is probably going to repeat the same lines at some point, because there was only like 6 lines or something that she would say in total. But the game is short enough that you don't really get too bothered by it. So that was a very neat thing. Do not save. Fun fact, this is what my first sketch of Kamla looked like. It's very cool that this sketch now became popular. Subscribed! Let's go! Thank you! Appreciated, Mast! I don't know why I clapped like a little child, but thank you. Thank you for the bits and the subscriptions. Love it. It's a nice sketch. Thank you. And a lot of this stuck through, you know. We had the blood, we had the jewelry. Did we have the green bangles? I don't remember. We made Kamla look a little more demonic, essentially. Whoa, hype train. That is new. I have not seen that in a while. Nacho also subscribed. So we have the randomization of the NPCs over here, and of the NPC, let's say, and basically it goes from one point to the other, and it looks for what point it wants to go to. There are many ways that you can have the NPC. Some NPCs have like a series of order that goes from 1 to 2 to 3. I know it is a bit little, but yeah, it's fine. It's not much I'm showing here. Oh shit. Some have randomized, like I said, so it shuffles the list. I think for Kamla we had done a randomized list. We placed a few key points around the map. Some of them have a lot more complicated patrolling route, because it depends on where your character is, where it's going, and stuff like that. So it really depends on like the complexity of the game. But that's usually the patrol stage, right? So this is state 1. That's one state. And during this state, it's scanning. It's still looking for the player. If there's a top-down view, it has its own radius where it's looking around. Sometimes it has a sound trigger. So it has a radius with like any sound you might do there. So it will run towards you. So we had like the bell thing. The bell in Kamla didn't have a radius. If you hit the bell anywhere, Kamla would run towards it. So that is the patrol stage. Then there is the chase stage. So this is when the character starts chasing you. It detects you and it's going to run towards you. If it touches you, it kills you or does something else. And in this stage there are two consequences that can happen. One is where it will kill the player, sorry, uh, kill player, I mean not the player, but you get what I mean, kill the PC, not computer, playable character. Or it will go into an investigation phase, sorry, investigation phase. And in this investigation phase, it's not exactly the patrol phase, because usually they're a bit faster, they look around more, it's more frantic, they change from seeing to the front to the back. And then after that there's usually a cooldown timer, right? Like it runs for a few seconds, like not 45, maybe like 30 seconds or something. And if it can't see you there, then it goes back to you here. So it's basically like different stages like this, and then it, you know, goes from these and stuff like that. And so this is what a state machine is called. So this is kind of common for every NPC in most games. Okay, I think that is most of the basic mechanics and all the segments that I wanted to talk about. Let's have some conclusion notes of everything we captured so far. Horror games are very immersive. I would say that is the strongest point of what makes a horror game good. They are easier, I don't want to say easier to finish developing. Funny coming from me, because it took me 3 years to finish it. Varied scalability is what I'm trying to say. Like you can make a very small scale horror game, or you can make a very good one. Simple mechanics, because if you think about it, in a lot of these games the mechanics are pretty simple-ish. Inventory management is something I didn't talk about, but a lot of games do have inventory management, resource management, like in survival horror. So the reason why Resident Evil also kind of has a limited inventory is it's its own puzzle, but it also adds the stress to the environment, because you know you want to be a little bit there. I didn't talk about the level design, frick. Oh well, I will quickly talk about the level design. I just want to show you guys what the how it looked like in Kamla for me to design the level, because that's something I really wanted to talk about. So first of all, this is how I was designing the level for Kamla. Okay, this was the first iteration, and I actually designed it in Sims 4. I really enjoy testing out the floor planning of a game in Sims 4. So this is what the first Haveli was going to look like. Even in the teaser, till the teaser, we made the Havelis kind of look like this. This kind of really does look like a Haveli, with like a huge courtyard in between, and you know, all the walls around. And this was the first floor. And after that you had a second floor, which was this. So on the second floor you can see the balcony below. It's like a big corridor here. You walk around some bigger bedrooms, and this is what we were going to do basically. Then we realized that this level is too small. There came a point where we wanted to make it more PC like. So that was one first iteration we did of the level. So after that we were like, okay, let's change things up a bit. So what we came up with later was a design like this. Now if you see, there's some similarities to what the actual game is like. If you look at it, there is the fire in Kamla that you find, the little pipe, a broken cycle which probably wasn't there, the jug, the little shed that you walk into where the scarecrow scares you, and then the whole floor plan of the Haveli. And this was going to be the entire map. Okay, and I was like, and I told Shubham, okay, let's have this. And then Shubham was like, no, bigger. We want different biomes so that we can have different screenshots and show like the different areas in the Haveli. So let's make it bigger. And I was like, okay, we can do that. And also, he didn't exactly just say to make it bigger. He said to break apart the house so that there is like not, it's not like one big box and you're running around and going in circles. Because if you think about it, there's not a lot of space for it to chase you, which he had a good point in saying that. So when he said that, I logged in and I worked once again on the third map iteration, and this is the final and original design. It's a screenshot of the game from top down, so it looks a little messy, but this is what actual Kamla map looks like from above, without the ceiling, before we added in like the textured walls. So if you look, this if you see any overlapping map walls, that's because we were comparing between two levels. Basically, okay, where is the entrance in this? The entrance is here. You start the entrance here, and this is the dining room, this is the kitchen, and this is the entire first red area of the house. And then you have this, which is the backyard, and this is the brick segment where you wake up and when you get caught. You have the entire backyard here. There's a well here which we add later, a little house in the backyard, and then we have the courtyard, which is where the items you have to bring are. The bathroom here, and this dark gray area you see is basically the lower floor, which is an entire maze of its own and is meant to be a maze. And this is something I took inspiration from a video essay I saw of like Game Maker's Toolkit, where he was talking about games having a hub area. So a hub is basically something like this, where all the broken parts of the level kind of connect together. So that helps with easier navigation essentially. So the start of the game, you do get pretty disoriented with where to go. But eventually, what this hub helps you do is that from any area, if Kamla is chasing you, you kind of technically have a place to go. There are cupboards to hide, but you also have like a different direction. So if you're going here and Kamla is coming from here, then you can run down here, you can run down here, you can run downstairs. Same thing if she's coming from here, you have two other ways to go to. And once this area unlocks, it's kind of like easier shortcut for you to go from this area to this area. It saves you a lot of time. It was all meticulously planned, and I had a lot of fun designing the level for that. And someone made an entire Minecraft version of this map. They made the entire game, the entire map in Minecraft of Kamla, and I found that very cool. It looked very nice. Whatever game you're making on whichever genre, play a bunch of them. And if you fail and struggle, it's okay. Keep trying, keep swimming, just keep swimming. That is my general advice for any of the games that you make. So I think that can conclude this whole workshop, and I think I went just slightly over an hour and a half maybe, which is amazing. And thank you everyone who sat and listened so attentively. I appreciate you guys. We can now have the question segment. Okay. Top 3 unique horror game mechanics you enjoy. Okay, that's a good one. I enjoy when the level kind of changes up and it trips you. So like you go through a corridor and then you go left and then it leads to a different place, but then the next time you go there, it takes you to a different area. I think that subversion of the map, if done well, is very cool to me, because it's like nothing changes in front of your eyes, but for your brain it's trippy. That's kind of why I like the whole concept of backrooms as well. So that is one. Just the atmospheric sounds, honestly, like the sounds can make the scenes so much scarier. So that is something I would put up. And third, paintings. You know, when paintings subtly change, subtle things changing absolutely scares me. That's why I added that one thing in Kamla where the painting of Kamla, it has like, it can have like fully filled black void eyes, and that only happens in a few runs. It's randomized, so it's like missable scary things that won't happen in every run. That shit really, I love that. So it can lead to boring game as well as or very similar games. So how do you make them unique? The setting I would say can make them very unique. So for example, there is a game called Boba Tea Shop. It's very simple in the sense that you serve some clients, and then the clients get scary, and then uh, you talk to them, and then there's a plot twist in the end, and it's memorable because it's like, oh, you're serving a boba tea shop. Or the chillas art games where it's all a plot of like you're a coffee, you run a karaoke booth, or you run a coffee espresso store, you run a cafe, or like Exit 8 where you're walking through an endless hallway. It's the concepts that really make them unique, um, more than the mechanic itself. The setting, like for Kamla, the most unique thing was that it's set in like India, in an Indian Haveli, I would say. So stuff like that. Do you think PT is rated appropriately? Do you mean like in terms of like the how high the how well it's like how critically acclaimed it's been? I would say yes, because it came at a time when that was still not as popular to have like the atmospheric scares in them. And they do some really good scares. If you think about it, there is not too many jump scares in PT. There is a decent amount, but I think another reason why PT got rated so well is because people really wanted that game to come out and it just didn't, and it's sad. Do you think as a dev it would be frustrating if you hit things in a game and it seemed like nobody was fine? That is such a good question. Um, yes, a little bit. It's not like, it's like you have to, when you make something that's missable, you have to accept that it can be missed. So a good example of that is in planning oversight. If you didn't know, the radio has lines, and the radio actually has lines that if you could understand it well enough, I voiced it, that the voices tell Emma to not run. Sometimes the don't part is hard to hear, so it just says run, which I think also fits, which I really like. Another thing I did with blinding oversight, very neat little Easter egg, is that the flashing lights at the start of the game where the bulb flickers, it flashes in a Morse code, so it can be transcribed into a message. But again, I don't think everyone would automatically think that. So, and what the code says, I don't really remember, so someone will have to see it. Um, and like I was okay that no one really sat and figured that out. I wasn't expecting it. So just a light bit of like, oh man, I wish people noticed, but you kind of accept it. That's what it is. I'm looking forward to doing more fun stuff like this, maybe collaborations and stuff, so that I don't have to be the one talking the entire time. And I will see you guys later. Bye bye. Thank you so much for the support. Bye bye.